It does seem at the moment that the Western world is moving to the right. We've had the rising populist movement across Europe, we've had Trump get elected in America, and a host of people you'd normally associate with being leftist, or at least centre-leftist, start to find sympathy for and battle against woke causes. But is it actually true in real terms that Western society is moving rightwards? A good litmus test for this is J.K. Rowling. She's got lots of sympathy on the quote-unquote right for her supposedly quote-unquote anti-trans views. As far as I can tell though, despite all of the bluster in sections of the leftist media, her general position seems to be that she doesn't want to be forced into saying that trans men are women, nor does she want biological men in women's spaces like changing rooms. Now, such views don't seem that extreme to me, but it doesn't insulate her from being accused of being a Nazi. She responded to that accusation recently by stating, "You can keep telling yourself this, but you're wrong. I'm a left-leaning liberal who's fiercely anti-authoritarian." Of course, we all know it's absurd to call J.K. Rowling a Nazi, and we all understand that she's up against some very radical and seemingly unwell people who spit a sort of bile that they accuse people like Andrew Tate of espousing. Here's an example of the hatred that J.K. Rowling gets on Twitter over just a couple of days. For those of you just listening, what we have is a bunch of trans people demanding that she perform fellatio on them and that she is essentially a prostitute. Of course, they're using different words. Now, I know you get hatred across the political spectrum, especially online, but I've always been wary of that hatred because when you fall into it, you essentially become what you despise. I mean, look at these insults. There's no difference between these and the incels on the supposed right. But the point I'm making here is that it's easy to sympathise with J.K. Rowling. These people don't seem very pleasant, and on top of that, her worldview doesn't seem that extreme or excessive in the slightest. This is where it's common for us to fall into the trap of believing someone like J.K. Rowling is on our team. But when you look at it through the cold, hard lens of reality, you see that she's actually not anti-liberal in the slightest. In reality, she's just one step behind wokeism. Instead of being an LGBT, she's just simply an LGB feminist. Of course, I don't say this because I don't see J.K. Rowling as being on my team, nor because I want to call her various forms of a prostitute or demand she does sexual acts on her enemies, like some of our tolerant and compassionate friends did earlier. But this is how our liberalist system works in the culture. It promotes this insane, out there, crazy, woke ideology, and when somebody stands up to it, they all of a sudden look edgy and common sense. However, people like J.K. Rowling are actually still massive liberals themselves who undermine our own culture and tradition. And you might say, well, who cares about undermining our culture and traditions? But there's a simple answer to that in the case of J.K. Rowling. The very magic of that which made her a billionaire, Harry Potter, riffs on the traditions of the British public school system. After all, Hogwarts as a school is based on that. The Hogwarts Express is a traditional British train. Even the name Harry Potter itself is reminiscent of traditional England. So what I'm suggesting is, while on the surface things can seem like they're moving against leftism and wokeism, in the real world we're really not moving at all from the liberal centre. In fact, sometimes we're even moving leftwards. I saw George Galloway pulling the same grift the other day. While Galloway presents himself as the old-school socialist with old-school values, I've always seen him as quite a savvy political operator. To me, Galloway tries to ape the traditional northern working man who'd spend 18 hours a day down pit and demand extra pint of gravy for trouble. Now, I know there was an issue with trade unions and loss-making industries in the 70s and 80s in the UK, but I always think the blokes themselves deserve a bit more than a pint of gravy. But this gets to the core point that Galloway is trying to play on, in my view. Back in the day, you may have had very firm economic differences, but culturally speaking, the men of the left and the men of the right agreed largely. Both sides were generally patriotic, and both sides believed in traditional family values. Further to that, both sides believed in Christian or at least post-Christian values being vital to the British culture. So I think this is what George Galloway, the socialist, is trying to riff on when he made these comments recently about the election of Donald Trump.
I keep talking on here about the inverted reality that we now inhabit, where liberals are in favour of authoritarian, tyrannical clampdowns on freedom of speech, where liberals love the three-letter agencies, where liberals love war, love NATO, love the European Union, whilst it's the people that used to be called right-wing reactionaries, if any opposition to these things is visible, it's visible there.
Of course he's right in what he's saying, and it's nice to see somebody on the left critiquing liberalism. After all, we can't have a healthy country with globalists around. You need both sides to be patriotic and believe in the nation. Perhaps I'm being cynical, but it makes me wonder what his angle is here. Is he going for the working class patriotic populist vote, the people that might be sympathetic to left-wing economic arguments and socially conservative right-wing ones? And hypothetically, if he did get popular amongst that demographic, it would seem like we're kicking it to the liberal system, but in reality we'd be playing right into it. That's because George Galloway is very popular in and only ever gets elected by heavily Muslim populations. That's because he talks about Gaza a lot, states how he doesn't drink alcohol, and talks about how Muslims are oppressed around the world. So while it may seem like things are moving right because George Galloway is riffing on right-wing talking points, in reality it doesn't change anything at all. Mass immigration is still going to occur. Islam is still growing in the UK. The British are still being made a minority in their own country. In essence, what we're facing is a form of cultural manipulation on display in the media, and we have to be very careful of it. I think as the right wing is redeciding what it is and what its future is, we have to be very clear on what the boundaries are so we can't be so easily usurped. These are my views, however. Do let me know what you think down below, and do consider subscribing to the channel.